Hey, everybody, and welcome to Facility Talk with the Froelich Brothers. I'm Scott Froelich, and this podcast is all about diving into the world of facility management, property maintenance, and the strategies to keep buildings running smoothly. So, our goal out of this podcast is to bring you practical insights from industry experts to help you navigate challenges, improve efficiency, and optimize building performance. So today I am thrilled to have Betsy Connolly at New Horizons Senior Living, and Betsy is the executive director there. So we'll be discussing her experiences and facility management, some of her biggest challenges that she's facing, and the solutions that she's using to drive success not only at her community but in the industry. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, Betsy.
Thank you, Scott.
So to kick things off, Betsy, can you tell us a little bit about what your company and what your role is, and maybe just share with us what a typical day in the life looks like for you?
Sure. I run a 450 resident senior housing complex in Marlborough, Massachusetts. We've got memory care, assisted living, independent living for seniors. At any point in time, we have about 100 people that are on a care package, which means there's 350, sorry, that are not. My daily pattern is like up in the air every day. You come in the morning, you've got a list of things you're hoping to achieve for the day, and inevitably, you have to follow the lead of what's happening in the building, also what's happening with the residents, and I do my best to still get through my list as often as possible. But that's the greatest challenge, probably.
Yeah, well, I'm sure the list never stops and only gets added to.
That's true.
I know that the executive director role, you wear a lot of hats. Um, I appreciate you sharing that insight with us. When you think about specifically facility management, we can start there and we can move this around based on, some of the challenges or trends that you've seen. But specifically about facility management, what are some of the biggest trends or changes that you've seen over the past few years?
The most recent change is situational. Obviously, there was a fire at an assisted living here in Massachusetts
Oh, wow.
about 3 weeks ago, and it was quite a significant fire. I think there were 11 lives lost.
Oh, my goodness.
We don't know for sure exactly what the problem was, but we suspect, based on reading the news, that someone who had oxygen in the room was actually smoking in their room, and that there were a fair number of other residents that had oxygen. And so the fire really executed very quickly. So
Wow.
as you might imagine, I mean, we have state requirements that we're following regarding planning for fires and prevention for fires. But when things like that happen, it's a good time to really step back and take a look at, everything that you do, just to, make sure you're doing everything that you can do.
Yeah.
And when you have as many residents as we have, there's also a big effort in trying to reassure everybody that we've done all of our drills and we've educated our staff, and that we have, the right fire prevention systems in place from a building perspective, to just be able to, manage all those things.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that, Betsy. I know that I'm sure it's a lot to go through for the families, the community, your staff, yourself. So I hope that you guys are all okay, and you're looking forward, and obviously, like you had mentioned, just learning as much as you can from that fire, and how to further prevent another accident like that happen again. But that's very sad to hear. I am sorry that you had to share that.
Yeah, so we went through the process of sending out a fairly lengthy set of emails actually on Friday. We've got some of our buildings are for people that are more advanced seniors, that are shelter in place buildings, where effectively, unless there's a fire in their immediate location, they shouldn't be evacuating. and then we have other buildings that are evacuation buildings. And then we have, about 220 staff members that we wanted to send something to, remind them of all of our systems that we have in place and what all of our procedures are.
Right.
And, now we've started another, process of just my team meeting every other week just to, go through a list of things that nothing that we're doing, wrong, but just things that we can continue to make improvements on.
Well, that's smart. I mean, like you said, as sad as what had just occurred, it's, now an opportunity to, um, you know, over communicate, really have the checks and balances, albeit they're most likely already in place, but just reassuring those checks and balances. And, it's all fresh for everybody. So I'm sure that, it's going to take some time to kind of move past it all. But, you got to start somewhere. And it sounds like you guys are starting in the direction that is going to make most sense for, you and your staff and the families and the residences. And yeah, that's a lot that you guys are currently in right now.
Like even just a point of today, we were talking at our team leader meeting that we do on Tuesday mornings that we have 92 fire extinguishers on the campus,
Wow.
and they are all tested monthly by one of our staff. So our executive chef said, well, gee, I don't know if all the employees would know where all the fire extinguishers are, which, it's a good point. I'm sure the kitchen staff know where they are down by the kitchen, but
Right.
if they happen to be for some reason in the lobby, because let's say they just came to work, it'd be good for them to know where they are. So, we'll be doing some retraining first to make sure everybody knows, where they are near their most common work area. But because we have so many people, maintenance guys, housekeepers, and others that are going throughout the buildings, just making sure that they know where the fire extinguishers are when they're in those buildings.
Yep. That's smart. Again, that's the over communicating and, reassuring that the training is as tight as possible with, something that going through like you guys just gone through. So that's good. Well, so I guess shifting from there, and I know that's hard to do, especially in the time that you're in, but looking ahead, what are some of the biggest goals for the next few years? Any particular challenges outside this most recent challenge that you're working to overcome?
Well, I wouldn't really call it a challenge, but the main building that I work out of, which houses about 200 of our 450 people, um, it was first owned by the Archdiocese of Boston and taken over and reconstituted as an assisted living building back in the late 1990s.
Okay.
So it had already been here for a number of years prior. So as you can imagine, the core infrastructure is pretty old. And then the independent buildings, there's two large independent buildings that have been up for about, well, I know we have a resident who just had her 22nd anniversary in one of those buildings, and she was one of the first ones to move in. So those buildings have been there 22, 23 years.
Yeah.
So just going through, what do we need to do from an infrastructure level? I mean, the 20-year-old building is less of an issue for the main infrastructure of the building, but it has one elevator for 80 apartments of seniors. I don't think we're going to build a second elevator, but plant one of the challenges we've had is in the elevator pit, water accumulates. So we have to stay on top of that to make sure we're constantly looking and constantly pumping to
Yeah.
get any water that's down there out. And then making sure that all the residents that live in that building are trained on if the elevator wasn't working, how would they get around? How would they get to the dining room? How would they get out the front door? And because we're connected to that building is connected to the assisted living building, they can strategically from different floors over there come to the other building, but you have to know how to do it. It's not as straightforward as there's one main ramp. And then on the ground floor, there's the door to get outside, and then you can go across a small parking area and get in on the ground floor of the other building.
Right.
So it's a matter of making sure people are educated, but in those independent buildings, we have turnover because people typically move to assisted living from senior housing, or they may move out of state to be near their kids or something like that. And so we started rehabbing those apartments, putting in vinyl plank flooring and, upgraded kitchens with,
Yeah.
better appliances. And what we found was because each of those apartments are different from each other, it wasn't like a cookie cutter. You could easily replace the kitchen countertops and kitchen cabinets. It would take about a month to get the product in, which is a month's lost rent,
Yeah.
which is not what we want to do.
Right.
So we're very fortunate that we're part of the Cummings Foundation and Cummings Properties,
Yep.
and they do this stuff in their sleep. And they developed a plan with us to turn over all the kitchens of all the apartments while people are living in the apartments. So
That's
big
great.
project,
Yeah.
basically, you know, uh, people go in on day one and help the residents move everything out of the kitchen in some bins that we bought for the purpose, stick them aside, maybe in the dining room in a corner somewhere. And then the next day, the maintenance team comes in and demolishes the kitchen. And then the next day, they come in and they install all the new cabinets and appliances and countertops. And then the next day, they come in and touch up, paint, clean the kitchen. And then that afternoon, someone else comes in and helps them move everything back into the kitchen. So it's about a 4-day process. And yeah, we are lucky.
Better than waiting for a month for cabinets to come in,
Right.
and then you
I
still got
mean,
to install them and do all the other work.
I know, and we're lucky because we have the 400 the assisted living building serves breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So we can tell all those people during those 4 days while we're swapping out your kitchen, you can come to breakfast, lunch, or dinner in the assisted living building.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So that's been a huge project, but in the main building that, I said is assisted living reconfigured in 1994, we have already for the second time upgraded all those apartments. And now we're doing other things like, we had probably 20-year-old air conditioning units, so we just spent about $1 million to buy 7 new air conditioning units to put on the buildings.
Wow,
Yep.
that's a big project.
It is because, you have to order these things like 6 months, these chillers 6 months ahead,
Oh yeah.
and then they come. And, by then just for your credit, we've made sure our roofs are all working well. But we put these chillers up, or the, manufacturer did in March. And then this year, out here anyway, we had a very unseasonably cool spring.
Yeah.
And in order to really get chillers working at capacity, you have to have some good hot days to see that there's enough flow through the system.
Right.
And we didn't have that. We had, of course, before we turned the chillers on in early May, we had 4 90-degree days, just when you don't want it.
Yeah.
And then once we had them up there and we turned them on, we just couldn't get enough demand from the units in order to keep it moving efficiently. And so we had issues of them shutting down, and, just new equipment brings new problems that you hadn't completely planned for.
Yeah, no
And
question
now here
about
we
it.
are, in July, and we're back to the 100-degree weather this week. And fortunately, knock on wood, everything is functioning.
Good. Yeah, I know those chillers and units, with new technology with those systems, sometimes there can be some hiccups along the way. So glad to hear those are operating well, because 90 degrees, it's been a hot summer in Ohio
Yeah.
too. Um, well, that's really interesting to hear, It sounds like a lot of the big challenges in maintaining the building or the facilities efficiencies with your partnership or the ownership team at Cummings has really been a uh, big partner or big resource of you guys.
Definitely. Tied back to the roofs and the chillers for a minute, um, Cummings had an initiative of purchasing solar panels to put
Yeah,
on the roofs of the buildings so that we could actually fund the cost of the chillers
yeah,
through those units.
yep.
And so far we've done it in the assisted living building, and it's worked great. Uh,
Did they,
Cost reduction.
so they do have solar panels on the rooftop
Yes.
on
Yep.
your assisted living
In
building?
just in the assisted living building right now. More to come on the other buildings.
Yeah. Did Cummings have to put a new roof down in order to put the
Oh,
solar panels
yeah,
on?
yes. So we had an initiative that's still ongoing to upgrade the roofs in the assisted living building.
Hmm.
I think we're about 3/4 of the way through. And
Nice.
in that area where the solar panels were put, that was the first area we started with the roofing work.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Man, no, you got a great partner there at Cummings to be able to support you in those big projects. 'Cause those are big initiatives. Those are big projects. When you're talking chillers and roofing and solar panels and remodeling kitchens in 4 days, that's a big heavy lift.
Yeah, we had one we this is another good example of the Cummings, power that they bring to us. In February, we had a resident who lives in what we call the cottages, which is basically a two-story apartment building. There's three of them, and there's 24 apartments in each one. And a resident and his wife, they bought a new exercise bike. So one night, 20-degree weather in February at 6 p.m., the husband borrowed the son-in-law's truck to put the bike in the back, and he backed up from the parking space to the doorway of the cottage building, thinking that he could get closer to bring it in, bring in the bike himself. And I don't think we'll ever know what exactly happened, but suffice it to say, he backed up not just into the building, but fast enough that he did a significant amount of damage.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, there was, it's the facade of that building, it, on that side is primarily brick. So there was the doorway, the door frame, and a whole bunch of the brick was, destroyed, in the accident. And the resident was fine, and his wife, who was in the apartment, was fine. Um, but it was 6 at night, cold weather. I got a call. You might want you might want to go over by the cottages. I think somebody's backed into one of them with a car. So I
Oh,
went over and I saw it. I called Mark, who's our associate director. Are you still here, Mark? And he was, and he came out. We were both like, oh my God, the fire department was already there and the police. And we called out to our local facility director here, and he was already home. But within like an hour and a half, he and five of his guys were here, and we had to wait a little while, waiting for the building inspector to come. Good news, they didn't. The only apartment they said couldn't stay in the building was the one where the fellow had actually caused the accident. So nobody had to vacate. That was a huge lifesaver. But, our guys had to, close up that open area, put
hmm.
some space heaters inside by the stairwells just so that, nothing froze, no pipes froze or anything in there. Um, and then the next morning at around 6:30, I actually live here on the campus. I started walking back towards my office in the morning, and there were already three guys from Cummings there pulling down all the brick and assessing the whole area to figure out what needed to happen.
Oh
And
my
and that was on a Monday night. And by Friday night, the whole area was rebuilt and back to normal.
gosh.
And imagine
Oh,
if we
what
had to
a
hire a vendor to do that.
yeah. Wow, what a resource to have.
Yeah, we're
Now,
very
are they,
fortunate.
because, we talk a lot about facility management and building maintenance in our podcast. So from a building maintenance standpoint, a lot of the communities we talk to, they don't have Cummings in their back pocket or, that kind of relationship. And a lot of times they have their own maintenance personnel and or regional directors that have maintenance teams. And a lot of them are vendor networks. They work with good partners that are in vendor networks to help manage, the different assets, whether it be the HVAC or the roofing or the pavement or your windows. So in your role at your communities, do you guys have, what are some of the obstacles or how are you guys doing building maintenance at your communities?
So we have, an in-house team of about 10 fellows that do everything from maintenance calls to put up pictures in new resident apartments to dealing with emergencies. Like yesterday, we had a leak, fortunately, on the first floor of one of the independent buildings, and you hear on the radio from the front desk, "How about you? I've got a active water leak in apartment, 110." And you hear one maintenance guy say to the other, "Can you run over there right away?" And they go, and it was significant enough that they had to, really extract water, and they found out what it was. There was some piping issue, had to extract water, had to put dryers over there overnight. Um, so, they run the gamut. I mean, we have some specialties. We have one fellow who's better at the electrical related things than the
Right,
others. And
right,
we've got another one who's, better at the keys, making keys and things and solving problems with locks. We've got someone else who's very mechanically oriented, so he is good with the boilers and the, HVAC units and all that. We've got a full-time painter who both does, upkeep on a regular basis of all the common areas, but we outsource the room turn painting because we have a lot of that with the number of apartments that we
right,
have.
right.
Actually, I should mention last year in the last 12 months we have, remember, we have 450 apartments. We had 92 apartment turnovers.
Wow.
And that's in part because at any point in time, we have 20 or 25 people that are on hospice services. So that's, unfortunately, that can be a driver of our turnover. So flooring in a turnover or painting in a turnover, we outsource those. We do all the, any demolition we need to do ourselves. So we rip up the carpeting. We've been putting vinyl plank in the apartments and the living rooms and kitchen areas. So if that needs to be swapped out, we pull that up. But outside contractors come in and do the bulk of the work on the room turn.
Good.
And then things that we either don't know how to do, sometimes we call on the plumbing department at Cummings. They may or may not have the time or the expertise to come here. Usually they have the expertise, but the right guy might not be available at that right time. So
Right.
we have a network of outside vendors that we use as well.
Good. That's smart. I mean, there's a balance there. There's a balance with cost savings, maintaining, high quality building maintenance, like what you guys have going on there. And obviously, time and speed play a factor into, making those decisions with, balancing the cost savings. How do you guys balance the cost savings? Is it purely based on availability? Is it, you have the resource with Cummings? Is it, let's lean on them first, and if they're unable to, meet the requirements, we're going to go to our vendor network? Is there a cost balance that you guys discuss in terms of strategy before making those phone calls?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we first look to our internal team that are already here on site, see what their availability and competencies are. And then we look to the Cummings team, and like I said, they typically have the competency. It's just a matter of whether they're available because
Yep.
they have other things going on too. And the timing, sometimes the timing can be adjusted. So something that we might need done, we might wait because we can get Cummings folks later. We know
Mhm.
it's always going to be more expensive to get the third party outside contractor in. So, whenever possible, we try to avoid hiring them,
Yeah.
but we have to sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, at that high room rate, 425 unit facilities, that's a lot. That's one of the bigger ones, in the industry. And, there's a lot to juggle there with, building maintenance and, facility management. What role does technology play in facility management for you guys? Are there any tools or innovations that you found particularly useful?
Sure, we have a very significant um, video system here on the campus. Like, we don't have anything recording, obviously, in residents' rooms, but we do have an ability to see what's going on in most of our hallways, stairwells, common areas for sure, doorways, our memory care in particular. We need to keep close tabs on the folks that are over there. So we have additional, camera video options over there.
Mhm.
Wiring, could be an issue. So over the last year, we've been on a plan to redo all the wiring to be able to get those cameras to a better visual. I'm not the technician that knows about that stuff, but I can tell you that, a few years ago we had a situation where a resident had an issue uh, with another resident, and you couldn't really see it on the camera because both the resolution wasn't very good, but also one of the people in the party was on one side of a hallway, so one camera saw her, and the other resident was on another side of the other hallway, like at a corner. So the other camera saw her. So you couldn't really get a clear visual of whether what one person claimed happened fully happened. So combination of, re-looking at where all those cameras are, as well as improving the resolution helps a lot. I always tell people if I had $1 for every time someone told me something was stolen from their room and we found it, I'd be a millionaire by now. But we continue to get, claims all the time, as you would in a place like this, that something was stolen. And, we had one recently where a couple who've only been here for a couple of months, so the woman came to me and said she noticed that she had 2 diamond rings and a gold band that were stolen, and they were missing. That's how she started. But by the time the week went on, we sent multiple people up to look. She was looking, couldn't find them. By the time the week proceeded on, she'd called the police. She was sure that one housekeeper had stolen the items. She told us that the husband, that no trash had been taken out that morning because we looked through all the trash in the room. But then we looked at the cameras and we saw that at 10:30 at night, she knew she had the rings at 6:30 at night at dinner. At 10:30 at night, the husband had put a couple trash bags out. At 9:30 in the morning, he'd put a couple trash bags out. We only know that because we can see him do it on the cameras,
Right.
right? So, we're all like agonizing over this, and she's trying to remember, where she last saw the rings after she took them off her hand. Oh, and the other thing is we saw her at the reception desk at 6:30 the night before they went missing. You can see the rings on her hand. So
Oh
we knew
my
she
God.
had them, right?
Oh, that's fun.
Anyway, long story short, after a week and calling the police, and she finally came to me about a week later and said, "I'm sorry. I'm happy, but I'm sorry to have to tell you that I found my rings." I said, "Well, where were they?" She said, "Well, I put this shirt on today to wear to dinner, and it has a chest pocket.
Oh
And
my
I
God.
bent down to pick something up off the floor, and the rings all came out." So,
Uh,
we
what
we
can you
have
do,
our
right?
camera systems not in the rooms, like I said, but we can find out, some a semblance of what's happening through
Yeah.
that unbelievable technology that we have. And we don't monitor those all the time, but we do have screen views of a lot of the video at the front desk where, someone could see, like if we're doing let's say someone from memory care got out of the unit, someone can look at those screen views from the front desk and see a lot of the main building to see if anybody sees that person on any of those screen views.
Right. Interesting. No, that's great technology. It sounds like it does a lot of good things for you and your staff. And video is you can't hide from video. If you've got it on video, then that should support where you're gonna need to look for things or get answers to things. But that's really interesting. Well, Betsy, we're running up on 30 minutes. I wanted to be fair to your time, and we try to keep this podcast right around there. If there's anything else you think you would like to share to our audience, any other insights, be happy to give you a kind of final word on anything else you want to leave the audience today.
Sure. Well, we're basically in the business of selling apartments to seniors and giving them the care and support that they need to be successful. So, curb appeal is very, very important in what we do.
Right.
Just making sure that we're taking care of, everything at all of our doorways. Like this morning, usually I live here, like I said, on campus. I walk to work. Some days I go to the back of the building, so I see that area. Some days I go to the front of the building. This morning I walked by the front. It's a hot, hot day. I noticed some of the plants were looking kind of sad. Made sure I reached out to one of the grounds guys because our maintenance director is on vacation this week, just to say, hey, please make sure you go out and drench some of these plants in some water today. And they were out there an hour later doing it.
Yeah.
So, we really strive to make our buildings all look good, not just for people that, are coming in to tour, but for people that live here and for their families. Our biggest referral source for new people coming in is a referral from someone who already lives here.
Sure.
So
Absolutely.
we want them to feel proud that they live here at New Horizons and that we're taking care of them, but also taking care of all of our buildings, so that they look clean and presentable and like a place that people would want to live.
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right. I mean, it is a home to many. I mean, it's a home to 450 residences on top of the families that are visiting them and their friends. So, I think that's so key. And you're exactly right to stay on top of the little things. It's those things that go a long way. And people recognize and get a sense for those little things, whether it's the flowers doing well or their doorways painted nicely, all those things add up. And, you're, uh, sounds like you guys are doing a really, really fantastic job with a lot of different moving parts and challenges in front of you. And, it's been really such a great conversation. Betsy, I really appreciate all the insights, your perspective on the challenges you're facing with the current, fire that's happened and the retraining and the communication and the efforts that are going into, having those checks and balances, really stood out for me. And I know our listeners will get a ton of value from it. So I just wanted to thank you again for joining us, and those that are listening, if you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to Facility Talk with the Froelich Brothers, and more expert discussions are to come on facility management and building maintenance. So thank you again, Betsy, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.